o nome, Camila?
Eu não coloquei, ele apareceu
É?
automaticamente. Na
Ah,
verdade,
tá.
acho que antes eu tinha feito um cadastrinho, não sei
Uhum.
se foi por isso que aparece o nome.
There's another from Brazil that like participates that she can.
Yeah, absolutely.
Talvez seja um.
Yeah, and if you see me, I'll add her to the group list. So I know that folks from Reno are moving from one event to another event rather quickly today. So they said they might be just a couple of minutes late joining us to get started with their presentation. So.
That's great.
I prefer this. You know, we might be able to schedule them not as regular collaboration. We should maybe get it
Can you hear me? Over there? Camila? Tracy?
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Oh, awesome. I think I had some kind of trouble with my internet here. Guess it worked out now. Yeah, I think so.
I can hear you, Angela.
Yeah, let's see with the
I can
webcam.
see you now.
Hello there. Just worried my internet wouldn't be good enough, you know. I guess it's working. And yeah, this time I asked you is on the other side, right?
Mexico.
Hello there.
Hi there. Oh boy.
Someone from Pará just arrived.
Oh,
Yeah.
our people.
Hello there. Yeah.
Hi.
Hello, Laís. How are you doing?
Starting to connect.
Verônica, se você clicar do lado do seu nome, você consegue acrescentar seu nome.
Do lado aonde?
Onde está o seu nome, do lado direito, que tem uma câmerazinha, onde tem o nome de todos os participantes.
Não estou conseguindo ver isso. Eu vejo uma chavezinha, mas está dizendo esperando por nome.
No meu, se eu clicar em cima, ele me dá a possibilidade de eu escrever meu nome.
Não deu aqui. Mas acho que tudo bem.
Were the computers. The last one.
Someone speaking with Ramona and her lapis or not?
I'm texting with them, and I see that Elizabeth is online, but I don't see her camera or her mic going.
Okay.
We did a trial run to make sure that we would have all the kinks worked out for getting the slides to show and people to hear each other and see each other. I'm just trying to keep an eye on who's joining, but it looks like some are still. Yeah. Offline.
She's not there.
Mm-hmm.
That's been. Our students.
Consegui.
That's awesome.
Virginia is in Southwest, working Mato Grosso. País in Fortaleza. And Aristides will be joining and getting the cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And we are. They used to take over laboratório do comportamento social. Camila and Veronica are from Paraná. They're in Londrina.
One good thing about having AS over there is that he can present all of us from
Yes.
here back from Brazil.
A different perspective for us to now know where everyone's connecting from.
Yeah.
Universidade Federal Vale de São Francisco. It's in the middle of the state, so it's the border between Pernambuco
I just got a thumbs up from Reno, so I think that means they're working on it.
Great.
Did she just turn? Okay, yeah, there she is. Right.
She never uses the camera.
She's going to use it. She doesn't use the camera when she chats with me? She uses the camera when she chats with me. Maybe just. Rita, can you hear us?
Who?
I am hearing.
I was checking with Rita. I know she's connecting Reno.
Oh, yeah. She's online, right?
Yeah, she's online. Let's see.
Or the one on right. Sorry, this one, sorry.
Oh.
Look at that. We have a home in Farlap.
Okay, hello everyone. It's good to see you all. Hi Tracy and colleagues and Brazilian colleagues, and hi Veronica, good to see you. Hi Angelo, everyone. Thank you for your patience. We have with us Calil from Brazil here, and Calil is with us during the week of one credit seminar offered by David Sloan Wilson, evolutionary scientist, biologist, who joined our group here at UNR to provide an overview of applied evolutionary science, which is a interaction between between multi-level selection approach and contextual behavioral science. So Kaliu has come all the way from Norway to join us. Thank you for being with us, Kaliu. So we just finished the 1 credit seminar session, and what I had arranged with Tracy is to bring more of an update of the project that I brought to University of UNT, Texas, this last spring, that offered a sample of research projects that we are pursuing here at UNR that highlights the role of verbal networks and particularly more of a functional account of rule governance in promotion of cooperation in a basic manipulation format. In this particular project, we have focused on delineation between cooperation and conformity, and I discussed this to some extent in Texas for those of you who were there with us. So the leading doctoral student who is pursuing this research is Elizabeth Gesge to my left, and you all know Rita Ola.
Yeah.
And what we're going to do now is start the PowerPoint presentation provided by Elizabeth. And I don't know how you guys have done this before, Tracy, but do we take questions throughout or at the end after the presentation has ended?
It's really up to you guys. The way we've done it is that whoever is not presenting would mute their microphones until they had a comment or a question, just so that we didn't have a lot of static or feedback or background noise.
That's a great idea.
It's entirely up to you if you want to hold questions until the end, or if you're okay with questions being asked throughout. I think we can all be flexible for what meets your needs best.
Yeah, I am happy with people jumping in with questions. I prefer to clarify something in context versus waiting for the end, so I'm totally open to questions throughout.
Okay, great.
So maybe, Elizabeth, as you go through each slide, maybe you could pause and see if you have any questions and then move forward. Would that work, everyone?
Sure.
So we will check with you from one, like as we see sort of relevant to stop progressing through the content, and check in with you guys about any questions you may have as we proceed.
Okay, great. Before we get started, just a couple of logistical things. Rita has her camera on, so we can see her, but did you want us to be able to see the rest of the lab, or
Okay.
there you go.
What is it? Hi.
Okay, so now we need, Tracy, we changed a little bit the arrangement we decided last week. So the presenter will be Houmanar lab. But, okay, so Elizabeth is going to launch her PowerPoint?
Sure. Oh. No, I'm going to
No, you see download?
Well, everybody can see us though right now.
Say again?
Well, can you see us right now? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't think.
As soon as you become the presenter,
Oh.
you will see your
Okay.
slides, and Romana,
So you need to download, is that what you're doing?
Yeah, it's a little plugin.
And then you go to.
There were like 3 Ritas at once.
Okay.
Because when this is what Elizabeth preferred to do, to see
Sure.
her.
When they change the presenter, things.
You're right.
Yeah. And there's also, so Rita and I were experimenting with how the presenter view works when you've got multiple connections, and how to screen share in the best way for both the presenter and also for all the attendees. And it's a little, the program itself is a little quirky. And so I think what's happening is that we've got 2 computers running in Reno in order to get the best view for everyone.
Tracy, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, did you make one final presenter?
I did, but now I have a little bit of an echo. I think you have both mics on both computers.
We need to turn off my We have.
Well, she isn't launched yet.
Okay, I can do this. Okay. There we go.
We see the presentation now.
Okay, good. And then if you want to keep all the people seeing, you will use I see it from here. Elizabeth, go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you all. If you can hear me, and let me know. Stop us if you can't hear us or any technical difficulties happen. It's my understanding that Dr. Houmanar has, I think, talked to most of you about this research and this line of research that's being conducted in our lab. I am one of 3 studies that's looking specifically at motivational stimuli to promote cooperative responding. My study, however, is slightly different from my colleagues in that I am looking at both cooperative stimuli and conformity stimuli to promote what could be considered either cooperative behavior or conformity type behavior. And also I have my email here, so I encourage if anybody would like to email me with questions or comments after this presentation. I am very much so open to discussing this research. Okay, so I think I'm just going to click. Okay, cool. So previous research in Dr. Houmanar's lab that extends beyond these 3 current theses has looked at cooperative stimuli as motivative augmentals and has found that a stronger history, reinforcement history with cooperative stimuli. And this is a history that we predict by employing the implicit relational assessment procedure, the IRAP. The more likely a person will cooperate following the presentation of that stimuli embedded in a statement in an analog work task with competing and financially neutral contingencies. So we also manipulate consequential contingencies as well. In the 3 current studies that are underway right now, there are 2 phases. So in our experimental design, we're utilizing a within subject alternating treatment design to examine the additive effects of verbal stimuli on responding in an analog work task under various, like I mentioned, financial contingencies. We have a neutral and also a competing contingency, and I'll go into more detail about what that looks like here in a few slides. So phase 1, I previously mentioned, is the IRAP. So participants come into contact with the IRAP, they complete their IRAP, and that determines the stimuli that we embed into that phase 2. So in the phase 1, we're identifying what cooperative stimuli or what conformity stimuli will be embedded into that phase 2, which is an analog medical data entry task with a choice that we consider to be a cooperative choice. And again, I'll go into detail about what that data entry task looks like here in a moment. Our experimental design is pretty elaborate, so if there are any questions throughout, I'm happy to answer them. Does anybody have any questions as of right now? Like I said, I'll go into more detail about both of these phases. Great, okay. All right, so the purpose of all of our basic studies, I kind of mentioned this here in the previous slide, is to examine the additive effects of verbal stimuli on cooperative or conformity responding under various financial contingencies, either competing or neutral in that analog work task. As I mentioned, it's a medical data entry task. Now, how we differ from previous research that's been conducted in Dr. Houmanar's lab, I will now go over. The first is that we are individually determining IRAP stimuli. So in previous research conducted in this lab, IRAP stimuli was determined either at the group level, so individuals take the IRAP, They aggregate that data, they take the top stimulus, and they embed that into each participant's phase 2. So it's not tailored to the individual. Others where another option or past research has looked at a different group from a representative sample, but a different group of participants completing the IRAP, and then you would take those stimuli and embed them into the EKG data and medical data entry task for a separate group of participants. So in that case, again, they aren't individualized to that participant because it isn't the actual participant taking that IRAP. So in all 3 studies that we're doing now, each participant is run through the IRAP. Each participant's individual stimuli, their highest stimuli, is selected to be implemented or embedded into that phase 2 work task. Another change or update that we've made from previous research in this lab is looking and accounting for the effects of the order effects of stimuli. So in an IRAP, and I'll show you what that looks like if there are those that are not familiar with what the IRAP looks like, is after you go through it, we run an analysis, and it provides you with various scores of how stimuli rank with respect to your history of reinforcement with them. And in past studies, we've always presented those stimuli in those motivational statements from highest to lowest. And so in the case of 2 other studies that are currently being conducted in our lab, we are altering or adjusting for potential order effects of always presenting the highest preferred stimuli first. And so we're manipulating a least to most or a most to least presentation of stimuli. And like I mentioned, we're also manipulating the financial contingencies in that data entry task. So looking at if there's no financial contingency or no competing contingency, meaning you don't lose out on cooperating, you make the same amount of money whether you cooperate or not, does that have an effect on somebody's cooperative responding when presented with a motivational statement, or what we refer to as a pay for time contingency, or a piece rate contingency, where if you select the cooperative response, you are going to lose out on money if you do so. And that's a piece rate contingency. So if you select to work alone or be independent, then you're going to make money every time you complete a data entry screen. Whereas if you work to help fix your partner error, the cooperative response, you're going to lose out on money because you're not going to make any. So we look at 2 different financial contingencies or manipulating a consequence. And then the last, like I mentioned, this is something that I'm specifically looking at is looking at the potential functional distinction between responding when presented with either cooperative or conformity stimuli. So seeing if there are if there's differential responding when you're presented with a cooperative stimulus like teamwork is highly valued versus a conformity statement, which would be something like fitting in or going along with others is highly valued. And in all cases, we're examining the predictive utility of the IRAP. So is the IRAP, when we select these stimuli from the IRAP, are they augmenting the stimulus function in the data entry task? So are they basically doing what we think they're saying they're going to do? Okay, and I just briefly wanted to touch, I'm not going to go full head into motivated augmentals. I just wanted to provide the definition, which are relational networks that temporarily alter the degree to which previously established consequences function as reinforcers or punishers. So what do we say when we say augmented function? We're basically talking about verbal condition establishing operations. So they can also increase or decrease the value of verbally constructed consequences as well. So they're verbal establishing operations, quite simply. And so just an easy example, this you can find, this is one of the most prolific, I guess, examples of a motivated augmental, is if I said, wouldn't an ice cold Pepsi be so good right now, or seeing this image of a Pepsi, if that statement or seeing this image produced you the product of which was you going out to buy a soda, then it's probably functioning as a verbal establishing operation, and the reinforcing function of going out and buying a soda has increased. So that's basically what we're looking at with these motivational statements. Are they going to increase the reinforcing function of cooperating, even if it is at your own expense, right? Losing out on money. Any questions on that? Okay. All right, so like I mentioned, I was going to go into more detail about what these two phases are. The first phase is the IRAP. So on the right-hand side, you see here our stimuli list. So we have three lists of stimuli. We have our conformity list, our cooperation list, and we have an independent list. And so these are not arbitrarily selected, compliance, fitting in, going along with others. We, I think it was, gosh, year and a half ago, 2 years, something like that, we sent out a survey to our representative sample, to undergraduates here on campus, and we listed 10 words that were best associated with conformity. So we basically opened up the dictionary, looked up conformity, and said, what are the 10 top synonyms to that word, or thesaurus, I mean, not a dictionary. And then we sent that survey out to our representative sample and said, rank these in the order that you think there's the strongest association. And our results were very clear. We didn't run stats on them, but we didn't really need to, because the top four for all four lists were very cut and dry, very clear that these were the top four for each class. So this is how we got our stimuli list to be included into the IRAP. And we, I believe our representative sample, I think we had 355 undergraduate people complete that survey. So a nice chunk of people participated in that survey. And then on the left-hand side, you see this is kind of a screenshot of what the IRAP looks like. So on the IRAP, you're always going to have 4 stimuli. On the top, you have your label stimuli. So in this case, we were assessing a comfortable or uncomfortable relationship to these target words. And so the target words would be those words that you see on the list to the right. So in this case, this example says cooperation. And so if you're not familiar, or if you've never taken an IRAP, the instructions before your trial block begins would be something like, in this trial block, I want you to respond as though you are comfortable with cooperation and uncomfortable with independence. And then you go into that trial block. And so in this next slide I'm going to show you is an actual video of what it looks like to go through the IRAP. And before I started, I just want you, I wonder if I advance, it's not going to just start. Sometimes it does. Okay, cool. So it's not going to start. So if you see, so here are those instructions. So it says, for this block, you must answer as though you are comfortable with cooperation and uncomfortable with independence. So those would be the instructions right before you begin your IRAP. And you'll notice that there's those weird, funky red dots on the screen. Those are eye tracking. So we actually took eye tracking measures both in the IRAP and the data entry task, kind of just as if we had the opportunity. Fortunately, we have a great partnership with the journalism school here that has this technology. And they are, through our partnership, allowing us to look at correlations between, hey, if you have a stronger history with this stimuli or stimulus as predicted through the IRAP, are you looking at it more? Are you looking at it less? Is that of this brief, immediate relational response, and you don't need to look at it very long? I'm sorry, somebody have a question? Oh, okay. So anyway, so I just wanted to say those are what those red dots are, and we'll also show a little bit of data with respect to the eye tracking measure in the phase 2 data entry task. So let me start this just to give you an idea. This is a very short clip of what it looks like going through an IRAP. As you can see, the responding is very quick because latency is what we're measuring here, latency and accuracy. So you'll see if somebody gets an X on the screen, it means that they've responded inaccurately to what the instructions were at the onset of the trial block. And like I mentioned, we're measuring latency. So the shorter it takes you to respond, the stronger it is, the stronger the perceived strength that you have with that stimulus is what we're assessing, basically. So the faster you are with it, the stronger history of reinforcement with that particular stimulus is what we're assessing. Okay, and so this is what some IRAP results look like. So once the person goes through the IRAP, we analyze their data, and this is the graph that is produced from that. And so you'll see on the x-axis, we have our stimuli lists. So on the far left, we have our cooperation stimuli. So collaboration, cooperation, they encounter all 4 stimuli in their IRAP, the independent stimuli there in the middle, and then on the far right, we have our conformity stimuli. And then on the y-axis, it's a little bit confusing. It's not the label words that we had in the IRAP, that uncomfortable and comfortable. That's not what those mean in this context. That's basically is, do you have a positive history of reinforcement with this stimulus, or do you have a neutral, or do you have a negative history with this particular stimulus? So those are, I know those are the same as what you saw in the IRAP, but they're serving a different purpose here on this graphical display. So you'll see with this participant, and I'm sorry, I can't really see. Yeah, oops, what did I do? Can I get out of this shrink controls? Okay, there we go. But now I don't know where my, oh gosh. What did I do? Sorry, I'm having a technical, stop sharing my screen? Can you can't still see the PowerPoint, is that?
Yeah, they can.
They can.
Oh, they can. Okay, I can't.
Yes.
Maybe you can just use the
Why don't you
computer
use
to.
this one?
Okay. But advance with this one. Okay, this is going to be interesting. Okay, so what I wanted to say with this one, so what you're looking at here is all stimuli from all lists here, and based on research actually that comes out of this lab, we showed that the predictive validity of the IRAP suggests that if you have a 0.5 or higher valence, so you see on the y-axis here, we have a range of negative 2.5 to positive 2.5. Anything that falls above that 0.5 or higher range indicates a moderate to strong relationship with that particular stimulus. And this is based on the predictive validity of the IRAP. So this has been tested looking at different valences in the IRAP, employing, embedding them into an experimental design and seeing if there is that predictive validity. So that's where we got that 0.5 measure. So for my particular experiment, I am always concerned with the top 2 stimuli from each list, the cooperative list you see on the left and the conformity list you see on the right. And if you look at this participant, you see that their top 2 stimuli for conformity, which are compliance and going along with, both fall above that 0.5 range, indicating that they had a strong to moderate relationship with both of the stimuli that we will embed into their data entry tasks. So we would consider this person as having a more positive history with conformity stimuli as compared to the other classes. So we would consider this person pro-conformity. And then the other 2 stimuli that are going to be embedded into their experimental design, or the experimental design, excuse me, are the top 2 cooperative stimuli. In this case, it's cooperation and team player. So I'm going to have to advance both of these. And where's that mouse? Okay. I'm hoping I'm advancing your screen since I can't see. Did that go on to the next screen? Yours isn't advancing, so
No,
I can't.
because it's,
Right, so I can't see.
Okay, can you wait one moment?
We're having technical difficulties.
Can you click this?
Yes, I can.
We can lose.
that.
Oh, there we go. Oh, yay. Okay.
Easy
solution. Okay. Any questions? I'm sorry, it was kind of that was a struggle for me because I was dealing with some IT issues. Did that make sense to everybody? What we're doing and how we're selecting our stimuli for the phase 2?
What is the y-axis relationship with reaction time and accuracy?
That's a great question. I wish I had my IRAP expert, who's Giovanni in our lab. But what I can say about it is it's completely related to the latency and the accuracy of their responding. And so a more positive valence on a stimulus is a shorter and more accurate response with respect to that stimulus.
Accuracy in this case is associated with the consistency of responding.
Correct.
As it's associated with the instruction that is given. As you recall, the instruction suggested in this case is respond to this stimuli as if you are comfortable with cooperation and uncomfortable with flying solo whatever independence.
Right.
So that basically is what we're referring to as accuracy. You are consistently responding in terms of your following of the rule, in terms of responding to being comfortable with cooperation. And the speed by which you're responding is under 3 seconds. Is that clear?
And the why, oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'm not sure that everyone over here is comfortable with that explanation yet.
Okay.
Just a different way, maybe.
Yeah, and it's a standardized measurement. So when we run every participant's IRAP, the y-axis is always the same. So it's always within that range of -2.5 to 2.5, or sometimes -3 to 3. So it's a standardized measure based on that accuracy or consistency of responding, as Dr. Houmanar said, and the latency.
So there's a calculation that occurs. So, for example, when it says to respond as if you're comfortable with this, a shorter latency of responding in a way that they're comfortable with would be calculated in a particular way, whereas a longer latency would suggest that they might be responding inaccurately. And then you flip that, right, so that you see if the latency response are sort of opposite of each other, but consistent with instructions. Is that correct?
Correct.
Does that help? Sort of. Somewhere in that. So the idea is that if you're comfortable with the relation that you're being instructed to respond to, you will respond faster. If you're uncomfortable with it, you will respond slower. And throughout the series of stimulus presentations and responses, those relationships are opposed, so that you can see if when you're comfortable, your latency is shorter. When you're uncomfortable, your latency is longer, even when all the relations between the verbal stimuli are opposing.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yes.
They call asking at the beginning of the instructions. Say that you're comfortable with cooperation and then comfortable with independence. When the word flying solo appears, the person should say uncomfortable. And in that particular case, what happens is that person did that consistently. Is that it? Is that what the graph is showing?
I think you got caught off there. Would you repeat that part one more time?
So the question was, when you look at the graph and you see that the orange bar is going toward the -0.5 for flying solo as a stimulus, that would suggest that they responded as uncomfortable with that stimulus, or
no? See, yeah. I'm sorry. So
is that it?
So I'm sorry, but that's what I was trying to say, and I should just probably take off the comfortable and uncomfortable, because those are not based on the label stimuli that we had in the IRAP. They just happen to be the same words that we used in the IRAP. So the comfortable and uncomfortable in this graph have no association with the target words that are the labeled words, I should say, that we used in the IRAP.
Okay, so when we look at the data for the bar that is associated with flying solo, as opposed to the bar that's associated with independent, when a bar is going up to the positive numbers as opposed to going down through the negative numbers, what would be an easy interpretation of that?
That when presented, when presented with that stimulus, that this particular participant was more accurate and quicker with that stimulus.
And you determine accuracy and quickness based on their consistency with response to the rule, as well as the latency of response when they see the stimulus to their response.
Exactly. Both in the presence of a comfortable label or an uncomfortable.
Got it.
Okay. And I'm sorry, that's confusing with that y-axis labeled like that, because it has nothing to do with those actual terms that were in the IRAP.
No, it's okay. I think I've had a little bit of history and background with the IRAP, but I think the majority of folks here have not. And so I think when that is helpful to just kind of break it down into a few more steps in terms of what goes into the calculations for accuracy. And like, I think for a naive audience, it's advantageous to just give a little bit more detail there.
Sure. Well, thank you for that. Okay, so now once we pull that person, once we run that person through the phase 1, that IRAP, we've now identified, like we were just talking about, those top 2 stimuli from both classes. And we identify those immediately in the chair with this person, and we then go over to the phase 2 on a separate computer and enter them into the motivational statements that are going to be presented in this phase 2 medical data entry task. And so this is a screenshot of what that data entry task looks like. So you see here on the left is what the person encounters every time they select, and again, I have another video to show you guys what this looks like. They have 2 buttons always available to them once they submit a data screen. They can either work alone or fix partner errors. So this is available to them at all times, unless of course they're working on a particular data form. But once they submit it, then these 2 options, alternatives come back up for them. So once you pick your choice, work alone or fix partner errors, your patient's information appears on the left-hand screen, and you are responsible for filling in the 2 yellow boxes. So we're identifying a person's heart rate and QT interval based on the information provided to you from the patient. And so now if you choose to work alone, you fill those 2 boxes in from scratch. And if you choose to fix partner errors, the 2 boxes are already filled in and you fix your partner's errors. And then a submit button will also be there. Once you've made your selections, you'll hit submit, and then once you hit submit, the 2 buttons then reappear to either make your choice to work alone or fix partner errors. So you're coming into contact with that choice many, many times in any given condition. So it's not like you only have to make that, you don't only, you have the choice to work cooperatively or work independently many times in a given condition. And then you'll notice at the bottom there you have an amount earned box. So this gets to that financial contingency. So people will know right away that if they select to fix partner errors, once they hit submit, they'll go, oh yikes, I didn't earn any money for that, right? But in the work alone, because it's a piece rate contingency, once they hit submit, their amount earned box will flash yellow with like 2 cents, 4 cents. They earn 2 cents a screen that they're making money on that, right? So therein lies that financially competing contingency to work alone rather than work cooperatively. And so again, here's oh, sorry, go ahead. Oh, okay. So here's a video of what this looks like. I'm going to go into detail about what the experimental design is, but it's 3 3-minute conditions, 11 of them, so 11 3-minute conditions. And at the end of every 3 minutes, you get a feedback screen telling you how much you earned in that condition, how many errors you had in that condition, how many data screens were processed working alone, how many data screens were processed fixing partner errors. And so you'll see on this screenshot before I started, this person is just continuing on from a previous condition. So they're getting their feedback from the previous condition. And again, you'll see the eye tracking here. And so what I didn't show you on the screenshot in the previous slide are the motivational statements. So what do those look like? So once a person hits continue, they'll click that start next session, but before they can make that choice, you'll see the text box appears in the middle and a motivational statement appears on the top that says collaboration is highly valued. So we made them click out of a text box with the motivational statement there as well to kind of force an observing response that they have to see the motivational statement at least once. So you'll see with this particular participant, they looked at the text box, they looked at the motivational statement, and what choice did they make? They chose to fix partner errors. You see that again. They hit submit, they looked at that motivational statement, and made the choice to fix partner errors. So it's really neat that we have this eye tracking data because it kind of substantiates, and also we got some really cool correlations between eye gaze fixation and the frequency of not only looking at the motivational statement, but also to select fix partner errors or that cooperative response. So with this presentation, you can see that those statements were potentially functioning as motivative augmentals, right? They were choosing in the face of a financially competing contingency that they've previously seen in another condition, so that doesn't change. So they've come into contact with that financial contingency, yet they still choose to fix partner errors. Ooh. Okay. So I'm going to briefly discuss the 3 different experimental designs. Like I mentioned, I'm one of 3 lab members. 2 of my other colleagues are also doing similar research in this area because it's so robust and we can just play around with this in so many different ways. But in all 3 cases, we're utilizing a within subject alternating treatment design. And like I mentioned, all conditions are 3 minutes in length. With the financial contingency, I am holding a piece rate contingency constant. So I have that financially competitive consequence built in. Another colleague is doing a pay for time contingency, so a financially neutral contingency. It doesn't matter what decision or what choice you make, you are going to make a flat rate in that within that 3 minutes, excuse me, regardless of the choice you make. So in either one of the in either setup, we have an ABA start in 3 conditions. And we do this in the absence of any motivational statement because we want participants to come under control of the financial contingencies in the absence of any motivational statement. So in all 3 research studies, we have this ABA. Now, if you're holding the piece rate or that financial contingency constant, then it would go piece rate, pay for time, which is that neutral piece rate in those ABA conditions. And then once you introduce a statement, you hold that piece rate contingency there. Or you go pay for time, piece rate, pay for time, and then starting with that contingency, you hold the financially neutral or pay for time contingency constant. And like I mentioned, for studies 1 and 2, which I'll go into very briefly, which are my 2 colleagues' studies, they are using a least to most and a most to least presentation of stimuli, like I mentioned, so you're not always getting your highest stimulus first in this presentation to account for any just change in condition effects of getting some sort of motivational statement, right? And in all cases, and all experimental designs are independent variables are the financial contingencies, so those ABA conditions, and then the neutral statements and motivational statements. We start with a neutral statement, so that's our condition C, to again account for any change in condition effects. We don't want to immediately start a condition with a motivational statement. And then D would be the presentation of a cooperative, or in my case, a conformity stimuli. The dependent variables here we're looking at are the frequency of those button selections, either fixing partner errors or working alone, how many screens you process in either condition and across conditions, correct and incorrect screens. So if you error on a screen, is it going to immediately change your responding to the other button? And then also that eye gazing data that we were looking at. We're looking at the frequency and duration of eye gazing at the verbal statements, at the buttons. So that's a pretty cool measure. And of course, a post-experiment questionnaire. Okay, so for study 1, this is my colleague's study, and I'll go through these very quickly. Like I mentioned, this is a experimental design where she's keeping the piece rate contingency constant for the motivational statement, but she's using a most to least and a least to most presentation. So D1, D2, D3, and D4 are indicative of motivational statements with all 4 cooperative stimuli. So they're not using the conformity stimuli, just cooperative stimuli. And they're presenting them, 1 being the highest stimulus, all the way to 4 being that lowest, and then balancing that with a group that goes from least to most. So they're presented with their lowest stimulus first, D4, and then going up to their highest, which I'm really interested to see what that looks like in terms of responding. And then the other study that is also doing a very similar experimental design is the same thing, the most to least and the least to most in terms of, with respect to the stimulus presentation. However, for this particular study, they'll be using a pay for time financial contingency, so a neutral contingency. And I'll say that I did a pilot with this presentation, just having a pay for time contingency, and we saw just adherence to cooperative responding like nobody's business. So I would predict that that neutral financial contingency will help to promote cooperative responding in those conditions when presented with a motivational statement. Okay, and then this is my study. Oh, sorry, did someone have a question? Did you have something? Okay. So this is my study. And so now you'll see that there's this presentation of, or an introduction of a condition E. These are our conformity stimuli. So in the case of the previous two studies, they're just taking all 4 of those cooperative stimuli and embedding them in rank order into the experimental design. However, I'm taking the top 2 stimuli from both and presenting them, and I did not account for order effects. They will get these motivational statements, D1 being their highest cooperative stimuli, E1 being their highest conformity, and then D2 being their second highest cooperative stimuli, and E2 being their second highest conformity stimuli. Okay, so why do we want to look at cooperation and conformity? Why is this of interest? It's really interesting to our lab in that cooperation is a term we use liberally, and it means a lot of things to a lot of different people. So our goal is to try to see if we can dial it in and see if we can draw distinctions between these two terms, because I would argue that sometimes conformity gets looped into the term cooperation. So if we take kind of a historical perspective of the term cooperation and just pull from the dictionary first, the definition of cooperation is to act jointly or to work towards some end. And of course, we always have to look to Skinner to see what he says, and his definition of cooperation is the reinforcement of 2 or more individuals that depends upon the behavior of both or all of them. So we can think of this as though there's a shared outcome that necessarily involves 2 or more people. So the factors associated with an individual's access to a social or tangible consequence relies on some conjoined action with another person. Okay, so there's this idea that there's this interlocked contingency with some joint consequence that's reciprocal. Oh, sorry. Okay, so whereas we have conformity is from our definition of conformity, pulling from, again, the dictionary, we have to comply with rules, standards, or laws. Skinner, again, we can look to Skinner for a definition of conformity. This is the shaping of the behavior to group standards by differentially reinforcing individual behavior by the community. So the community steps in to suppress some behaviors that are considered bad and reinforce behaviors that are regarded as good. And this quite often involves a hierarchical social relationship. So with conformity, right and wrong then become correlated. With conformity, in any instances of behavior which are non-conforming but not otherwise aversive to the group are henceforth treated as if they were aversive. And an example that I like to use are cultural artifacts. So standards, events, symbols, or customs that have acquired some psychological function that may have no direct acting contingency or aversive property to the group, but they perhaps at some point may have. So for example, just because it's right around the corner, wearing white after Labor Day, right? Is that an instance of cooperating, or is that an instance of conforming to some group standard? Then you can also pull an evolution. Oh, I'm sorry, did someone have a question? Keep hearing. Nope, okay.
Just, I was thinking here, but if I understood correctly, cooperation would be more related to the production of positive reinforcement contingencies, while conformity would be mostly with maybe avoidance or escape contingencies. That would be it.
Yes, I think so. I think that cooperation most definitely is some interlocked behavioral contingency that results in some commensurate consequence for 2 or more people. But I also think, I don't know if you said negative reinforcement, because I also think that 2 people could cooperate to avoid aversive. You know, we could both pull on something to avoid shock, right? And it requires both of us to do that. So conformity here I've got 2 more slides to talk about, so that might help clarify. Okay, but there's evolutionary distinctions too, so that we can look at. We can look at both of them as contingencies of survival, right? We cooperate with individuals or conform to group standards for our own survival, for cultural survival. So we are shaping behavior to group standards that are based on the contribution or apparent contribution to the group. So cooperating or conforming, you're promoting protection, community, attending to your environment, and survival skills. And we also want to look at the social context as always, and Glenn argues that the social context is what sets us apart, right? Sets humans apart, that we're culturally transmitting these rules, right? Think of the cultural artifacts like not wearing white after Labor Day. The organism is behaving with respect to environmental pressure, which also provides this within group selection pressure that favors individuals that either have these cooperative or conformity repertoires. So the behavior analytic distinctions between the 2 terms. For cooperation, like we talked about, there's this shared outcome that requires 2 or more individuals. And so the factors are associated with individuals' interlocked behaviors that the outcome of which is some consequence that in most cases is commensurate, right? It's equal for both. And it's also susceptible to flexible rule following, right? There's the direct acting contingency, but there's also variability in that individual responding to produce reinforcement for both individuals. Whereas with conformity, we're seeing that there's more of a history that's under the control of a history of rule following, right? You've been reinforced in the past for just following rules, and so you're just going to follow rules. So you have a history of this positive consequence from either the speaker or the community, right? Or avoidance of negative consequences from the speaker or community. And so this might lead to rigid rule following that might lead to maladaptive rule following, right? A person who is controlled primarily by socially mediated consequences will have problems contacting other reinforcing consequences, right? They're not as flexible with their responding and not variable with their responding, and therefore will lose out on selection that might actually be reinforcing to them. In either case, we're talking about a listener's history of responding and perspective, and we always need to keep that in mind, and it's necessary in order for us to delineate the conditions under which somebody's going to cooperate or conform. And so the current studies are only manipulating those financial contingencies to see that even in the face of losing out on money, will participants continue to cooperate? But future studies could look at consequences that further this potential distinction. So manipulating reciprocity, manipulating your perceived partner to get at more of that conformity or cooperative responding. Okay, so before I go into my data, I just want to switch this. Okay, so what we're going to first look at is within subject data. So this is a graph of all, so far we've run 41 participants in my task. And what you're looking at here is on the x-axis, you have our 11 conditions. So you remember that piece rate, profit share, or paper time, piece rate, paper time, piece rate, and then you have that introduction, motivational statement, or neutral statement in this case. And then on the y-axis, you have the % of screens processed in each condition. And our blue data series is our fixed partner errors, and our red series is our work alone. So in this case, the red data series is that individual response, that selfish response, if you will, and the blue data series is our cooperative response to fixed partner errors. And again, we're really concerned just with the last 8 conditions, starting with that neutral statement condition. And you can see here in those 4 conditions that have motivational statements that there is an increase, a bump in participants fixing partner errors, or an increase in that cooperative response. And so we've run stats on this. I have to rerun my stats on this because we've run more people since last time, but this distinction has only gotten larger with more people that we've run. And so we are beyond power analysis on this of being statistically significant, which is pretty cool, which furthers our argument that these statements are functioning as motivative augmentals or increasing the reinforcing function of fixing partner errors, even in the face of losing out on money, which is pretty cool. Okay, so in addition to within subject data, we were also able to look at between group data because of our different response classes. So not only were we identifying the top 2 stimuli from each class of terms, so cooperation or conformity, but based on a participant's responding, we could classify that participant. This is all post hoc analysis. This is when we're looking at our data. If that participant is considered more positive towards conformity stimuli as compared to cooperative stimuli. And so when, again, we're taking this top 2 stimuli for each participant. So for this person, for their cooperative stimuli, it's that group effort and group cooperation, or in this case, it's really their least negative stimuli. And their top 2 positive conformity stimuli for this participant, follower, and fitting in. And recall that we're concerned with any stimulus or we're regarding any stimulus that falls above that 0.5 or higher as having a strong to moderate relationship with that participant. So in this case, this participant, we would identify, if we're going to look at between group differences, as fitting into a group that would be more positive to conformity stimuli, right? Because they have both of their stimuli that were presented in their experimental design that were conformity were higher than 0.5. And so we did this for all 41 participants, and we've identified 8 participants that are pro-conformity or both of their stimuli fell above that 0.5. 8 participants that have the same only with cooperation, so both of their top 2 stimuli are higher than that 0.5, and then the remainder are neither. So that could be either none of their stimuli are above 0.5, or perhaps one of the stimulus is above 0.5, but not both. Any questions on that? I know that can be a little bit confusing. Okay, so that's how we assessed for between groups to see if there were any, to see if we could further the predictability of the IRAT by group differences. And so this is our between group data. And so again, on the x-axis, we have our 11 experimental conditions, and on the y-axis, we have our % of fixing partner errors. And again, we're only concerned here with those last 8 conditions. These are our either neutral or motivational statement conditions. So the 4 groups here, like I mentioned, in purple, you have both. So that means that all 4 stimuli fell above that 0.5. Neither is green. Red would be both of their cooperative stimuli fell above 0.5, and blue is both of their conformity stimuli fell above that 0.5. And so we've played around with these data a lot of different ways, and by far the cooperative group and the conformity group, when you take the average across the 4 conditions that include motivational statements, choose to fix partner errors at a percentage that is almost double the other 2 groups. So, but those 2 groups, when you compare the cooperative group and the conformity group, of their average of fixing partner errors is relatively similar. In fact, I think they're exactly the same. Their average across all 4 motivational statements is, or conditions, I should say, is 35%. But what's interesting about these data is if you look at the last 3 conditions, well, let me back up. If you were to be in this, just kind of taking your own perspective here, if you were a participant in this study, you most likely would come into contact with that direct acting contingency of not making any money and see your responding of fixing partner errors or working cooperatively drop off, which we see in these data, right? This kind of is decelerating. However, with the conformity group, if you look at it, yes, their data is decelerating a bit, but in those last 3 conditions, there's more of a maintenance of responding with that group compared to the cooperative group. which we thought was very interesting, as this goes back to our definition or our distinction for conformity. They're continuing to fix partner errors at a rate that's maintained more so than the other group, which aligns with this definition of conformity as being this socially mediated group. Being part of this, being part of this group is reinforcing this rigid rule following, right? This history of following some rule. And then here's our eye tracking data. So this is looking at eye tracking data across those groups that we identified. And on the x-axis, we only have our 8 motivational statement or neutral statement conditions. So the conditions that included a statement in them. And then on the y-axis, we have the average number of eye gaze fixations across conditions for each group. So you'll see if you just look at that very first condition, neutral statement number 1, if you looked at that green data series, you'll see that on average, the neither group or that neutral to the stimuli looked at what we're looking at here particularly is the motivational statement. So that scrolling motivational statement, on average, they looked at that 4 times in that 3-minute condition. So you can see in these data that the cooperative and the both group looked at the motivational statements within those conditions more than the other 2 groups. But again, what we find interesting with this is that the conformity group, if you go back to their fixing partner errors or the rate of fixing partner errors, is much higher than either one of those groups, yet they're looking at the motivational statement is lower. And so again, that goes back to this rigid rule following, where at this point, what we're looking at, or what might be happening, is that they're not even attending to the motivational statement anymore, that they are now just under the control of this rigid rule of I'm just going to fix partner errors, right? And they're not sensitive to that motivational statement anymore. Any questions on that? Okay. Oh, sorry, I forgot I had animation on this one. Okay. So we can talk about the implications of our basic research, looking at stimuli and the predictive validity of the IRAP to promote cooperative responding or conformity responding. And in looking in the research on motivative augmentals, it's very, very limited. And so the current studies are an attempt at an experimental analysis at identifying stimuli with a history of reinforcement, as we're predicting in the IRAP, right? And using those stimuli to alter the reinforcing function of cooperation or conformity, right? Is this a cooperative response or is this a conformity response? And from an evolutionary perspective, cooperative behaviors that sustain groups, but are at an individual cost for yourself, right? I'm losing out on money, but it might be good for the group. Those should lose out to self-interested behaviors, right? That self-interested behaviors would maintain and those cooperative behaviors wouldn't be sustained. But that's not the case, as we're seeing, right? When we're promoting these motivative augmentals, we're seeing that even in the face of this social dilemma of losing out on money, there's a maintenance of responding. So that's pretty cool. So it's a way, if we're thinking about it from an organizational perspective, it's a way to promote within group cooperation, even if it might be at the expense of the individual. And then based on the results of these studies, we're hoping, we're running more studies, we're hoping to see more distinction between the cooperative and conformity group with respect to that maintenance of responding. So we're starting to make the case that there's this potential distinction between the 2 terms. And so by understanding the conditions under which a person cooperates or conforms, we're able to increase specific pro-social behavior, right? And selecting specific stimuli with some shared stimulus function as predicted by an IRAP or some other assessment, right? To establish cooperation or any pro-social behavior in large-scale organizations or any hierarchical structure. And then by strengthening the utility of assessment tools like the IRAP, this helps our organizations or hierarchical structures in selecting those specific stimuli, right? So we're better fine-tuning what stimuli we select to use for communication to promote any number of cooperative or pro-social behaviors. And then lastly, I don't have it here, but the opportunity to use eye tracking as an additional measure, and our analysis on that also furthers this not only the predictive validity of the IREP, but also our success in identifying stimuli, excuse me, in the IREP, embedding them into some sort of analog task and seeing those correlations between looking at a stimulus and behaving with respect to it. So thank you. Do you have any questions? Yes. Yeah, I don't know how to.
Okay. Click on the camera.
The camera.
Yes.
Okay. Can we exit out of?
Click on the flower.
You're hidden.
Remove this screen.
What? This one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Why don't you click on it? Click on view.
No. Cancel. Go. Yeah.
Click on that camera again.
This one?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're not.
This is short.
What about this guy?
Oh, you went away.
There we go. Hold on. Let's just see if we can escape and then do this.
Then go
Okay.
to the camera. Oh, camera. Webcam.
This guy?
Yeah.
Oh, here. Cancel.
Okay.
Audience view, yeah.
Yeah.
I think the next one.
Attendance tab. Okay. So well. Okay.
Okay. Friends.
Uh-huh.
Huh?
All right.
Well, can you see it? Can you see us? Or?
You can
yes.
go up, go in the link again.
You can see us.
Yes, yes, we can see you.
Okay.
Right, we can't see you, so therefore we're going to listen to you.
Yeah.
Oh, you can't. Oh, hold on. Let me try this.
Is it because we're?
Let me try to not make you the presenter.
Oh, you have to. You have. I think you have to remove us as a presenter.
I'm working on it.
Okay.
But I don't necessarily want you guys to see my screen, but you will for a minute until I can figure out how to turn this off. Or did you see stop sharing? Oh, here. Screen sharing stop. So I just turned off our camera. Let me turn it back on. There we go.
Just leave and then get in.
Should we do that? Yeah, and just check the link. Rita, should we just exit out of this, go to your link, and get added?
Ramona, there should be Rita, whoever's working the computer, Elizabeth, there's a little screen button at the top. And if you click that, that will turn off your screen share. And then, oh, no, that's the camera. There should be one to the left of that that looks like a little computer monitor.
Yeah.
View
View
everyone?
everyone? Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, you can see us?
Now you can see, I think you close that.
No. We want to minimize that.
Minimize.
This. Oh my golly molly. There, okay, we're just
And
gonna.
then minimize it.
I don't know.
Why don't you go to the left?
There we go.
Very good.
There we go.
Here we are. Okay.
I know you have questions here.
Basically, what, guys, this is offering you is a very controlled sort of perspective toward ways by which verbal stimuli may serve, in this case, a motivational function. Again, these basic manipulations are isolating very sort of controlled influences that may have more of an implication in terms of impact in applied settings. And as Elizabeth mentioned, this is a gradual, systematic sort of a line of research that allows for us to gradually build up our analyses and bring additional questions pertaining to the consequential manipulations that serve an important function when we are thinking about particularly cooperation
type interlocks in our analyses of interlock behavioral contingencies at this point. So it's a gradual buildup that you are seeing here. And of course, Elizabeth is interested potentially in pursuing a dissertation project that offers the additional sort of questions that we can bring into our analyses that also will capture ways we can think about the partner here. As you may have noted, the simulated partner is really can be perceived as fake, which is absolutely a variable that we have to be working on here. So just wanted to kind of highlight that. So how can we further tap into the reciprocation of a sharing of reinforcement and social aspect of it that can be built into this task. So just to add here.
I got a question. Hi. So just generally or basically, how did you guys determine, you may have explained this, Elizabeth, and it may not have included it, but how did you determine that the financial consequences were competing reinforcers for choosing cooperation?
Or choosing or what? Sorry,
choosing partners, fixing partner errors, is that what you're saying?
How did we determine whether if the financial contingency was competing?
Because it's a piece rate contingency whereby you're actually losing money or not making money in this case by fixing partner errors. That action is not leading to production of point, which turns into actual money. By the way, there's a fidelity built into this task where they actually get paid by the end of it. It's not constructed pay, it's actual pay.
Yes, yeah, and so they're actually getting paid to do this. So this isn't just like imaginary money. And we also although this is a secondary measure, in our post-experiment questionnaire, we also ask them, hey, what did you select more? Why did you select it? And 9.999 times out of 10, it was because I was getting paid to do that, right? So, yeah.
Yes, how did y'all determine the amount that was given?
Based on previous research. So we just took what has been used in the past and implemented on it.
Also, just to highlight that the task that we have used was designed by one of my previous doctoral students many years ago, whose wife worked in a service company here in Reno that provided data entry services for the medical health system here in Nevada. So that this task is pretty much drawn from that direct experience of data entry. So we kind of timed out of here.
I don't know what happened because we can hear you, but everyone's cameras just went out.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so that's not just us. Okay.
So that's another kind of a layer to add here, just to let you know. And the three conditions that Elizabeth mentioned across the three methodological designs there allow for us to determine whether or not the behavior of the individuals came under the influence of financial contingency. Just to highlight those three financial conditions at the beginning of every set of exposures, that phase one was set up to determine that as well.
Yeah. I have a simple question about the procedure. The partner is always wrong, right? So if I correct I'll correct his errors, there will be errors. Is that true? Is that correct?
So if you select partner errors, there's always going to be an error in that data screen. Yes.
And in that case, I have to fill my data,
we didn't hear any of that.
The same between the two. Did you understand the question?
Sorry, it's just cutting out, so we're not hearing it. So
when I choose cooperation, I choose to fix my partner's error. I'll fill my data and data, or just
No.
data? I just correct it.
Yes.
So there's no difference here on the cost of the response.
Well, the cost of the response is if you choose to fix your partner's error, you're not going to make any money to do so.
Yeah, but in terms of effort to do it, that's not a variable. That's not a problem.
No, you're just identifying where that error is in that particular data entry screen, fixing it, and hitting submit.
But you're not receiving a point for it that turns into dollars.
Right.
Okay, I got that part. What I think it's really, really interesting, the task, the fact that it looks like actual the work that the people is doing, right? Ramona pointed out that it actually came from that kind of behavior.
That type of industry, yes, exactly.
And, that kind of task is, I think it's interesting that in the sense that it mimics actual behavior. And possible when we are some of our research, when we are choosing roles or choosing putting numbers, things like that. That's a basic behavior. That one adds that layer that I think is interesting. I'm not sure if you, when I asked about the cost of response, that was because I think it was a possible other variable that impact whether or not choose cooperation. I don't know if you guys ever ran an experiment manipulating that, or if you have that idea for the in the sense that if I choose cooperation, I have my work to do and the other work to do. And that also means real life, especially bureaucratic work, where if I stop to help the other, I have to do my work and the other, and that might be a variable. I don't know if you guys ever tackled that or is on the lines or think that that might be interesting to do.
Go ahead. Well, I was just going to say, you know, and that's really interesting. And in this design, it's almost like a free offering. So it's not like you have to do 30 screens within this three minutes, right? It's just you're going to lose out on money, but there's no kind of loss in productivity with respect to some goal that you had. It's just that you're losing out on money.
Yeah.
What you're saying, I believe, is, which is a great point that could be manipulated later on, and if there is a joint group outcome that is stated and that goal or objective is highlighted, whether or not that might bear any function on responding in terms of response cost, not only as related to what you're making on a piece rate, sort of a under the piece rate condition, but also are you meeting the goal? You see, so that could be added again as an additional layer later on.
It's a research, because I think that kind of task and some of the points you are making are really interesting for OBM and applied. It's more straight, directly transferred to the idea in OBM and possible ways to improve the cooperation in a company or in a task or something like that. So that that's really interesting to look at. The other thing that I was thinking.
Go ahead. Sorry.
And I would like to you said that is one of the points that you are interested in pursuing more on the research is the distinction between cooperation and conformity. I was intrigued by that distinction in the sense that you are trying to make not only a distinction in the not topographical distinction. You guys are looking at trying to make a functional distinction between them. So I would like to hear a little bit more about what you guys planning to do on researching that topic. What you guys want to manipulate? What's future research going that way?
Well, we haven't, right now we're concentrated on this research because we want to make sure that these trends continue with respect to the differences in the maintenance of responding between the two groups, but we're hoping to also work on this conceptual piece of this and really nail down because it's very subtle and topographically they look similar, but it's showing in this experiment that indeed there might be some differences in what we're calling cooperation might not be cooperation.
And what this offers, which you very articulately mentioned here, is this question of when we, from a speaker perspective, generate the rule for our listeners from leadership standpoint, from the focus on influence on our audience perspective, capturing the impact of what we are offering in terms of information, in terms of impact on listener is extremely important, especially when we think about motivational speeches and motivational speakers and how the words can have impact. And we are seeing it more than ever before, really, at the national stage right now in the United States and globally, how rhetoric can bear huge function in terms of really even affecting financial markets at this point. Does that make sense? So how do we delineate, frankly, in terms of ways by which what we think as promoting of cooperation in majority of cases is from a listener's perspective is rule following, and when we think that we have an agile task force and the individuals within a context of interlocks are attending to contingencies, and when we are thinking about promotion of situational awareness, for instance, how do we think about instruction to promote that type of variability and agility and response sensitivity to consequential manipulations, and how instruction might have a role in promotion of sensitivity or rigidity, you see, from a listener's perspective, and how tools like IRAP can bear some sort of a function for leadership or management in terms of allowing for us to know thy audience, in terms of are we resonating to our followers? Are we resonating to our students? Are, you know, and taking the perspective of our listener becomes very important in terms of influence in majority of ways, basically. Promotion of productivity, motivating, and as we discuss motivational sort of variables and motivating operations in general, one thing we want to bear in mind is that temporary alteration is what we are evoking here. And how do we maintain it is another question. Are you guys familiar with preachers? You guys go to church, or do you know about church dynamics? Tracy, you know where I'm going with this. And you see Trump, for instance, they repeat same set of statements over and over and over. And some of us sit back and say, why is he repeating himself? Well, there's a research, sociopolitical research and political scientific research behind why probably Trump is repetitious in repeating those simple set of statements that to some of us might be frustrating, but it is resonating to his base, basically, and is maintaining that sort of evocative function. And these are very interesting ways of thinking about maintenance of that which is temporary right now over time. You see, these questions have come up in our lab as well in terms of how we maintain motivational impact.
And that's, I agree with you that it's very important to see, especially again going to OBS settings. Sometimes motivational signs or something like that, they work for a while and stop working.
It diminishes over time. Yes, exactly. And how do we design the environments whereby there are subtle changes in ways we introduce the words over time, and using the assessment tools that we have at hand in our consultations, our partnerships, our design of our own work environments and all of that, to maintain that orientation of our participants, our co-workers, our audience members through the messages that we want to bring in and influencing others from verbal sort of stimuli standpoint. Do you guys see the utility in our analysis of meta-contingency when it comes to manipulating these factors in general? Like, let's sort of think about our interest in terms of cultural impact. What are your thoughts in terms of potential for, from your standpoint, for your work to bring this sort of an angle into it? Do you see utility?
Yeah, I was thinking a couple of things, and this is going to dance around your question a little bit, but might help to provide some additional stimuli to get us there. One of the first things that I was thinking as you were initially talking about the different definitions and perspectives of cooperation and conformity is that with cooperation, there does seem to be some sort of a defined aggregate product. With conformity, there may be or there may not be, and so that might be a distinction that could get us there.
Understand?
Right. I need to think about it a little bit more and what that would look like or how that would have stronger implications. But it seems that there's something going on. There's clearly something different going on with cooperation and conformity. I think the distinction is important, especially as you're making points like in your discussion that, you know, if we want people to behave in a more pro-social manner, that we need to differentially reinforce it, but then perhaps isn't that generating conformity rather than cooperation? And so starting to think about those things, that if our interventions themselves are generating conformity as opposed to cooperation,
both categories are capturing pro-social approach, just to kind of confirm here, but it depends on what the goal of our design of interventions are. If we want people to show up and engage and do what they need to do, like voting, for instance, like behaviors, do we, in terms of design of socio-political, political, scientific interventions, do we want them to capture the impact or you know, decide by interacting with others and discuss the potential effect or impact of their decision, or do they just blindly go in and vote? It might be in some cases that would be the desired outcome. They're pro-social in a sense that they show up and do what they need to do for the purpose of doing what they need to do, and and they bring in the history, in this case, their politically preferred history, and then vote as their political history suggests they do so, by not thinking about the potential outcome and having that sort of a group cohesion to make that impact basically be seen in their small groups. And I think that's where Elizabeth's interest started, in terms of ways we want to delineate between these two potentially different histories that individuals bring into their decision making, if you will. You know? And the question is, do we, from our designing of cultural interventions, do we see value in some cases to have access to the history of individuals responding and reinforcement histories to sort of adjust our verbal sort of statements and form of verbal behavior or outcome of verbal behavior to bear an influence? Do we see value in
design of interventions in these ways, basically. That's what that means.
And I think there is, because one thing in the test itself that I like very much is how you suited for the individual. And thinking about if there's any kind of aggregate product that's of interest in a particular context, knowing what kind of contingency I have to put to produce a particular kind of behavior that to achieve that aggregate product is very interesting. I found that the way that you arrange the contingencies for that particular individual, I find very interesting, both in the experimental sense, but also thinking about a possible intervention in a social issue, a social problem, in the sense that sometimes you need different contingencies depending on where you are applying it. So it might be a very interesting path to follow. You understand more and start building and thinking about
those types of interventions. Let's say, like I have a more direct, sort of relevant work that I'm doing with Mark Alavocius in terms of bringing our services and training to a major global energy company. And these are oil rigs where you have workers on oil rigs. These are extremely dangerous sort of settings to work in. And for the purpose of safety, while you are designing the contingencies on the oil rig to evoke is team dynamic, agility, situational awareness, and engagement with your team members. So in those sort of circumstances, someone's history that is more rigid might not be conducive to the changes that you are setting up for dynamic, peer-driven sort of engagement to prevent disasters and promote productivity. You see, so a majority of cases, task forces that they bring in from different parts of the world, first of all, have issues with English as a first language to begin with. So you have a very fairly diverse sort of a workforce in terms of language comprehension. On the other hand, some of these workers just follow rigid rules, and no matter what you set up in terms of contingency design for them to engage with other team members on an oil rig is very difficult. You see what I'm saying? To bring that situational awareness and sensitivity to consequential sort of aspect of what's going on and respond to the variability in responding on the part of other members of the team is essential here. You see, so instructions in those kind of cases might bear different effect on different individuals based on their histories. Not only language becomes the difficult part, which is a different story, but their sensitivity that to responding, and rigidity becomes a very challenging aspect of our design of organizational contingencies. You see where I'm going with this in terms of designing the communication aspect of what needs to happen on a moment-to-moment basis. It's a very fascinating challenge that kind of relate to where we're going with this to some extent too.
I can see where it's definitely advantageous to know, and the more skillful repertoire is perhaps the one who can either cooperate or conform under the conditions that would suggest one is more advantageous or the other.
Exactly.
You've got to figure out how to drive the long history of adhering to conforming toward cooperation first, and then figure out how to bring it under the control of the contingencies and or stimulus control.
Exactly.
Right. I mean, like as you get closer to a deadline, sometimes you don't need quite as much cooperation. You just need people to produce and conform. with the onset of the semester, I think we're all kind of feeling that a little bit, right? Like it's not, we don't need to like do a lot of cooperation, talking about things. We just need to get it done right now. But at the same time, you still want to promote that in certain situations, particularly when you have students who are generating ideas. You don't want to just say conform, go, because that's not the repertoire that we necessarily want to generate either. So there are a lot of dimensions that can be manipulated here with this preparation.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you also have to be aware of, this is something that we haven't looked at yet, of like a counter control with the conformity. You know, so you would hope that that if you are going to promote some sort of responding, that if it's not occurring naturally, then you would maybe on the first instance, it would be some conformity statement, right? And then hope that somebody would come into contact with the contingency, right? And then it would be some cooperative response after that they come into contact with some reinforcing consequence for engaging in that behavior.
Kelly, you had a question.
That
was a while ago, but sorry.
You saw this yesterday.
Yes, please do. Please do.
So,
or set up questions here, yeah.
So you were talking about your definition of cooperation.
Yeah.
Is when you have two individuals that are the joint could behave of two individuals that. But what's the joint effort of? Because you have just one individual having prosocial behavior. What's the other?
Right.
behavior?
Oh, so in this experiment, in this
Yeah.
setup, when you're fixing partner errors, you're saying there's no joints.
Yeah, it's just a prosocial
Process.
behavior.
It's a prosocial behavior, and so in this case, we could argue that the cooperation is verbal, right? That you're the joint outcome here is that you are engaging in a cooperative behavior that is perceived to be shared with some. So you're kind of deriving this rule here that by cooperating, you're engaging in some shared
What's
outcome.
the outcome that would not be possible if just one of them? It's not clear the outcome.
So the perceived outcome is that if I'm fixing your errors, you're fixing my errors, right?
But what's the outcome that would not be possible if just one of them? Because in the definition of cooperation, you will have
Right, you have some shared outcome.
yes,
Well, so in
and
this
the
case,
outcome would not be possible
Well,
if just
I mean,
one of them was.
right.
But in this case, maybe you would have the outcome, but it would be like it would be smaller or something.
Right, so what we could do in that case, yeah, you bring up a good point, would be like a tally where you see like how many times your partner has fixed your errors, right, in the same condition, because that would be that shared outcome.
That part that we will manipulate.
Yeah, that perceived like you're scratching my back, I'm scratching yours, that there's this win-win joined, interlocked, right, contingency of if I'm going to do this, then you're going to do this.
And on the other hand, maybe yeah, it's good for everyone, but
Yeah.
it doesn't seem like the joint product is not clear, and if the joint product is not clear, how it's going to select the cooperation itself.
So, and that's why you see that kind of degeneration of responding, right? Because then you could also further that argument, then is that conformity responding, right? If there's no joint outcome, are you engaging in this response because you have a history of rule following and somebody with this motivational statement is telling you to do this?
And I was wondering if it would be, you probably thought about it, but if instead of having like a cooperative and no message, informative, instead of have all these sessions, if you could have like, for example, in one session, you could be randomly having cooperative and no message.
So instead of having a neutral statement that's in between like a cooperative statement and a conformity statement,
you could have all in one, and then you could compare the proportion that they cooperate or don't cooperate within the session.
So within a 3 minutes,
or maybe have
within
a
a
longer
3-minute condition, you would alternate the statements
Yeah,
within
like
a 3-minute.
randomly.
So having it more condensed, a shorter time period.
No, but maybe longer time, and then you can have like, for example, like half of the trials with the message, cooperative message,
Right.
and half of the trial with no cooperative message, but randomly distributed. So then you could, then you don't have to have all these. I don't know. I was just thinking because then you would diminish this effect of having like.
Well,
if you're having
I
the message all the time,
right.
it might be different than have it intermittent within the session.
Yeah.
And then you could see the proposal. Then you would have half sessions. Within that session, you have half trials with the message and half trials without the message. So, and then you could analyze as proportion of cooperative and not cooperative within. You could divide the trials and see the proportion.
Right.
Well, what we have set up is the neutral condition in between, just to sort of be able to delineate between what happens within the context of having the motivational statement and then bringing back to the neutral statement to see whether or not the behavior goes under the influences of the set of statements that is pretty much focus on your task, stay on whatever on task, and then bring it back into contact with the conformity statement, just to allow to parse out the potential carryover effect. So that's why we haven't mixed it up. But that's more of an alternating to some extent than what we have.
And it's also interesting with this length of time to see that kind of deceleration in responding, because it gets to Ramona's point about that momentary alteration of responding.
And one good question that you brought in terms of why the task is not delineating between cooperation and conformity that you guys might be also interested in. In this, please bear in mind that this question, the set of question we're asking here is capturing the history that the individual is bringing into the task, which is more pro-cooperation or more pro-conformity, and see what happens within this competing financial contingency over time. And we see that their behavior comes under the influence of the financial contingency in the pro-cooperative context, meaning those with that history, than with the conformity. You see how it's a question that is capturing of that delineation from the individual's history standpoint, not the task itself. You see, and whether or not they catch up with the impact that the task is making, and eventually come there under the influence of the actual financial pay. You see what I'm saying? That's why we don't see it as a confound. But as we move forward with actual designing of the consequential end of it, your question is absolutely important in terms of the conjoint outcome.
And then I was thinking, if you're seeing this effect, diminishing effect, why did you stop the experiment and just didn't see where it would go? Or why didn't you have like longer sessions so you would see like if at some point would stabilize or something like this?
Well, this is an extension of previous research, so we are trying to stay as consistent across research as possible. But we're able also to look within each 3-minute condition with all of these motivational statements and see that responding over time. So we can get at that sensitive measure within each 3-minute condition as well.
I would just curious if at some point would just stabilize or we would not have effect at all.
I don't know. Well, and that would be a question of then are you just repeating through those motivational statements again to see if they might have that motivational effect, or are you introducing then a 5th and a 6th and a 7th, and will that still maintain that, or is it at what point, where's that threshold of just I'm not doing this anymore? Excellent. I don't know how you might have somebody in there for hours.
You can have set some stability for it.
Yeah.
But then I'm doing some experiments with concurrent schedules, and when you have concurrent schedules, you ask them, you have the coins or money will shape the behavior, but when you ask them why they are choosing one or the other one, they often don't know what they do there. So I was thinking that if you could use some concurrent schedules to give money, so they have 2 choices.
Well, I mean, this is kind of a concurrent schedule. They have there's 2 different SDs, right? They have work alone, fixed partner errors, 2 different behaviors, and 2 different consequences.
Yeah, but you just give consequence for one. If you could go.
Well, that's not getting any money is also a consequence.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
but if I meant in a way that if you could intermittently giving consequence to both answers, and then you could have, for example, 3-to-1 relationship. So they were, so you could have like one would still have the value of but they would not perceive it. They would not be under control of, oh, one of them gets paid, one.
I think the reason that we, and Ramona can also speak to this, is that we really wanted to just look at we wanted to magnify that antecedent as much as possible. And so if we apply some, like, you make 3 cents per screen here, but then 1%, and then see how what your rate of responding is right across both schedules. So we just wanted to keep it as clean as possible. If we don't make any money.
To keep those variables constant.
Yes.
Just zero in on this particular motivational component.
Yeah.
But excellent question.
Oh yeah, and this is kind of the point that we've been making, which is like, gosh, you can go so many places with this. Yeah.
And I was wondering, as Ayesha was saying about the cost of responding each, and I was wondering if you have the data of how long they spend when they are building it up or when they are fixing something.
Comparable. So like how long it takes you to fix a partner's errors versus how long it takes you to do it from scratch. Comparable.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have I can't think of what the time is off the top of my head, but we have it, and it's not anything.
It's undifferentiated.
Yeah, it's not anything that would affect that. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question too?
Yeah.
So there are lots of potential pragmatic implications that make sense if you look at the results at the individual level. You've shown a pretty clear group pattern. How does that compare to the individual data?
So we also, so we have the problem of right now having small groups, and that averages can sometimes mess with individual data. So I didn't show it, but we also just, we graphed medians to make sure that we weren't misrepresenting, and the median data as well is showing these trends as well. So there are some participants, and I can't remember off the top of my head, where they don't come under control of any financial contingency and they never fix partner errors, right? So they have a 0% of fixing partner errors across every single condition. And the majority of them, it's like 75 to 80% of those people all fall in the neither group. So we have very, very low. So I guess to answer your question, consistency of responding is pretty good at the between group level. I think that was.
Is that what you were asking?
Yeah. Was that what you were asking?
Consistency of responding.
Across in a given group.
Okay.
And across group differentiation is comparable across groups.
Yeah, I would like to see. I always like to see the comparison between group level and individual participants.
So like show a couple of sample individual participant data.
Right.
Yeah.
What else?
Just one more. I listened to this in presentation yesterday, so I had the opportunity.
Oh, you have time to prepare, Khalil. That's.
Just one more question. So each block had 3 minutes, and they finished one and started another one.
Yeah. Okay. So
So you always started with a message or not?
Yeah, so within every 3-minute condition, well, not the first 3 conditions, right? Those first 3 conditions have no statement, right? Yeah. Neutral or otherwise. The very first, when they click start next session on that 4th condition, they have a text box that has a neutral statement and it scrolls across the top of the screen. Yeah. Once they click out of that text box, the message continues to scroll across the top of the screen until they make their choice to either work alone or fix partner errors. And once they make that choice, the statement goes away. Then once they do their data, they fill it out, they hit submit, the statement reappears right at the top of the screen again with those 2 choice buttons. So they're getting it however many data screens they process per condition is how many times they're seeing that motivational statement.
Yeah, because you said that the first sessions were not important, but they would like to see the sessions where they had no history of message.
Right.
Like I think that was interesting because the second.
Are you talking about the eye tracking? Because the first 3 conditions are displayed on all data except the eye tracking data.
Okay, but the first condition you have is already with message, right? Conform to your cooperative.
The first message that anybody's ever going to see is a neutral statement.
Neutral statement. Okay.
Yes.
But I don't remember the on the graph.
It's on there. So I always highlighted the last 8 conditions. That those last 8 conditions always start with a neutral statement.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And I was also thinking that if you would see like even bigger difference if you separate it by day, you know. For example, if you have the first one like with message one day and then without message in the next day, so we wouldn't have the effect of the message on the. But maybe not if you didn't.
But then
see
again,
on the,
the neutral condition is meant to demonstrate, or actually, frankly, account for potential carryover.
Okay.
Right, and
you are not
demonstrate
as interested in comparing that. It's
sensitivity
more
of
kind of
responding.
okay. I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let's say to that.
Are there any other questions? We might have time for just about one more question before we're close to the end. Well, I want to say thank you for presenting today. I think one of the amazing things about what you're doing is that you have so many other directions and places that you can go. And so it's difficult to talk about because you're presenting kind of where you are and what you're doing right now, but then we're all going, whoa, you can go here, 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 and here. And so you're taking a really nice approach to getting to some of those places and ensuring that you're doing it in nice stages to go there. So it's phenomenal.
Yeah, thanks for listening. We're really excited about it.
Thank you for your interest too, and I brought sort of a glimpse of what Elizabeth is doing to Texas, and I received a lot of reception and great comments as well. So what we're planning to do right now, by the way, Elizabeth defended her thesis, so she's already done with her master's project, but what we're doing is running the number of subjects we need for publication purposes. So that's the goal we are highlighting here for you guys to hear, because we promised, Tracy, we will publish these, didn't we? Submit for publication. So.
That's writing commitments right now and promises. So
yeah, that's what we are absolutely following up with. And we will bring you updates in terms of the other questions we're asking, other projects that are evolving. You've noted, I'm sure, the other 2 projects that are being ran concurrently, and I look forward to bringing updates regarding those as well.
Fantastic. I had sent out an email a couple of weeks ago about what to do in the fall. I think that based on kind of the general response and some conversations here, that we might just try to do one meeting between now and December, rather than trying to do every month. And maybe even instead of having a lab present during that meeting, we actually just have some open discussion about some of the things that we've been talking about in the last 3 meetings. So we just have a little bit more time to think about it and generate some additional ideas and thoughts about.
So this will be more of a discussion session. Is that what you're saying?
Right, so since we've heard presentations from 3 different labs now, it might be nice to now start to think about all of these things together and separately, and then in the way that they may interact or intersect with each of our labs respectively, so that we could start thinking a little bit more about collaborations and generating new research questions together.
So what are the dates you're thinking about? Have you considered the date?
Yeah, I threw out 3 dates. I was just kind of going with the last Thursday of the month because that's kind of what we had done in the summer. It's convenient for us because our lab meets on Thursdays, so it's a little selfish there. I'm asking you to conform, perhaps. But I had looked at September 27th, October 25th, and November 29th as 3, but it doesn't have to be any of those, actually. I don't think we're going to find a day that works for everyone. And so maybe if we pick a Thursday in one of those 3 months, that seems reasonable enough, we can see what we can do.
Interestingly, my lab is also scheduled on Thursdays as well. So we'd be happy to be open, be participants in any of those dates you mentioned. So you pick. So we're open.
I know that Mila said that she couldn't do the dates in September, October. November 29th is a little bit late in the semester. That's also Thanksgiving's the week before, I believe. Yes, Thanksgiving is a little earlier this year, and so that's why I didn't pick that week. But why don't we say November 15th? It's right in the middle of everything, and we can just say that. I'll email it out, and it's right in the middle of the semester. Some time to get up and running, but still a little bit of time before we close everything out.
So this is November 15th, you said?
Yes.
Okay, great. At what time?
3:45 Central, and which is 1:45 for you guys in Reno.
Okay,
and what time in Brazil?
5:45 Brasilia.
And I'll send an email out again to the group with the connection details.
Might be a little different. Guys, you have to.
We changed.
No, they will have to figure out because I think November, South Brazil will be already in summer time, so probably will be 6:45 for Vila and Veronica, but it's 5:45 for the people in Pará and University. So it will be a mess. But yeah.
Very good.
And I think that would be a good time, like if folks are kind of working on development of projects or that sort of thing, that if they want to get some feedback from the group, have some specific questions with the number of people with different expertise and amazing skills in this group, that would be good for students.
Very cool. So we will send, I believe, or have already sent, I'm not sure, between Rita and Elizabeth, the PowerPoints with the email address, the front page of it or the first slide, and feel free to email Elizabeth, and of course I will be with her when she is submitting the answers too, so it will be a joint response. So
fantastic. That's great. Well, thank you again for presenting today.
Thank you, everyone. Ciao.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Stop recording. Where's the